You know, Lindsay, you call this one of the biggest races of the year. This could end up being one of the biggest upsets of the night. They tell me delinquency letters like this one here that are currently being sent to Gilchrist are actually a mistake. A lot of this area behind me was totally flooded. We're talking a couple feet of water. Consider that misleading at all, that that's the wrong information that's being shown?
It is the wrong information, and we're going to correct it.
Take a look behind me. As you can see, still a lot of trucks. I'm looking at just a portion of this lot right now. Have anything to be concerned about in terms of whether Amtrak will still come here if you're governor. It's like this live shot. I'm going to knock it out of the park. Well, let me show you a little bit, Karen and Lindsay, about exactly what Roanoke County's trying to get rid of. As you can see in this parking lot along Brambleton Avenue, we see some cigarette butts. And this is why so much of the piping throughout town needed to be replaced. You're looking at a piece of the old piping. This is actually the second race in a row, if you count the governor's race last year, that the polls really can't be trusted. We wanted to find one of the coldest spots in the Star City. Lots of stop and go traffic. Not exactly an ideal atmosphere for a business that's looking to be moving product back and forth. It definitely was a significant difference from what we saw back in 2008 to what we see now. It's not just that the voters changed their minds, though, in our area. It's really how far they went in the other direction. You know, Lindsay, you call this one of the biggest races of the year. This could end up being one of the biggest upsets of the night, and that means nationwide. What we're looking at right now is an absolute dogfight in a race that a lot of people didn't think would end up being all that close. Right now, with about a little more than 91% reporting, according to CNN, Gillespie holds a 1-point lead, 49-48. Now, of course, a lot of these districts that still need to report these precincts likely will come from Northern Virginia, maybe a little bit from the Richmond, Virginia Beach area, and that traditionally has helped Democrats. So it could end up being good news for Mark Warner, but either way, this race is turning out to be a very, very close one. If you looked at the polls leading up to this, Warner had a relatively comfortable lead. Even the closest polls showed him up by at least 7 points. One Republican-leaning poll had him at 4 points, but at least the ones tracked by Real Clear Politics had it as a much larger margin. So definitely something a lot of people here were not expecting. Now, we had an opportunity to sit down and talk with Senator Tim Kaine a little bit earlier today. He said he believes that Warner is going to win this race despite how close it may end up being, and he tells us that it's because of his ability to connect directly with voters.
The person-to-person contact, encouraging folks to make phone calls and convince their friends and neighbors becomes even more important in the low turnout year.
And do you think that's been the case for Senator Warner?
I do, and I think that they knew that going in, because Mark's run races in presidential years and non-presidential years in the past.
And Becky, Lindsay, I'll tell you, one of the things that's really interesting about this is the Southwest Virginia results that had come in. Just to list a few areas that Warner won back in 2008 when he won the Senate for the first time. Salem, Roanoke County, Botetourt County, all went for Warner. They all this time have gone for Gillespie. When we talked to him, he said he was going to need a big margin in our area, Southwest and South Side, in order to do well. Looks like up to this point, he got, for the most part, that. It'll be curious to see if it's enough to put him over the top. We'll, of course, continue to keep you updated throughout the night here on Fox 2127. But for now, reporting in Arlington, Aaron Martin, Fox 2127, 10 o'clock news. Believe it or not, this fight is over a post office box and whether that qualifies as a residence. Well, a judge has already ruled that in this case, it doesn't. And according to several attorneys we spoke with today, this is something they've never seen before. For 30 years, Wendell Gilchrist called Bedford County home. But after getting divorced in the late 1980s, he packed up his life and moved to Florida while keeping a post office box in Roanoke. It's a plan that worked well until mid-2011.
Roanoke City, for some reason, started taxing me for my vehicles. And I never lived in Roanoke City.
The city sued Gilchrist, claiming he owed more than $6,000 in delinquent personal property taxes. What's running through your head when you see that they're saying that you owe them taxes in a place you've never lived?
I told them they were wrong. But they said they had to collect the taxes.
After hearing both sides nearly 3 years ago, a judge dismissed the case. Well, the city decided to appeal that decision, and this has sat untouched on the circuit court docket since December 2011. Gilchrist says he continued to receive notices from the city, including this one from a third party claiming legal action if he doesn't pay more than $650. We reached out to the city attorney's office, but they declined our interview request, citing that it's an ongoing legal case. As for Gilchrist, his motivation for coming forward is to warn other people who could face a similar situation.
I'm afraid other people are being taxed on tax without representation. And this here is being showed principle what they're trying to do to other people.
Now, I was able to speak to the city attorney's office today. They tell me delinquency letters like this one here that are currently being sent to Gilchrist are actually a mistake, and as long as this case is ongoing, they will stop sending those. As for this case specifically, if the city doesn't ask for an appeal date for this hearing by next month, the judge can effectively dismiss it. That'll be up to the judge, though. Now, many of you at home may be wondering why the city is going through so much cost and time. We're talking 3 years at this point to continue with this case. Well, we filed a Freedom of Information Act request to find out that answer. We'll share it to you as soon as we find out the details. Reporting live tonight in downtown Roanoke, Aaron Martin, WSLS 10. It's the last thing Furman Wirtz, Cave Springs student Zach Fouts, or Doug Wingate ever expected after receiving a routine spinal injection to help with back pain. That simple shot proved to be contaminated, creating a fungal meningitis outbreak. It led to a long, painful battle for Wirtz and Fouts, but others weren't so lucky. According to the Center for Disease Control, 63 people nationwide died from fungal meningitis because of those contaminated shots, including Doug Wingate. Scott Sexton is the attorney representing Wingate's family in a $25 million lawsuit against the drugs manufacturer New England Compounding Center and Insight Imaging in Roanoke, which gave Wingate the contaminated shot.
You make certain assumptions that that's a safe drug, that there's a government agency that's regulating that. Every single one of the people that we dealt with that was affected by this outbreak was shocked to find that no, that wasn't the case.
By mid-November, less than 2 months after the first reported case of meningitis, the U.S. Senate's Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee released a report detailing the outbreak and how it happened. The report found New England Compounding was first suspected of producing a drug that caused a form of meningitis in at least 2 cases more than a decade ago. The Food and Drug Administration began investigating the company back in August 2002. Of the samples that were studied in that inspection, 5 of the 16 vials were contaminated with bacteria. But instead of taking action, the FDA left the enforcement to the Massachusetts Board of Pharmacy. Compound pharmacies tend to fall between the cracks when it comes to regulation. Pharmacies are regulated by the state, drug manufacturers by the FDA. But compound pharmacies both distribute and manufacture drugs, meaning there's no one agency they report to. In the NECC's case, no action was taken until January 2006, nearly 4 years after the initial cases of meningitis were found. I checked to see what sort of discipline the NECC did in fact face and found only a required inspection by a third-party agency. The company was later warned again by the FDA, this time for selling compound drugs without a specific prescription and for selling misbranded drugs. According to the Senate report, the FDA then reasserted its authority to the NECC, saying the agency would take, quote, enforcement action, including seizures of the firm's products and/or injunction against the firm and its principals. But despite these warnings, the FDA did not take any action against the NECC until last fall's outbreak.
I believe that the FDA didn't act the way that they could have acted.
Salem Congressman Morgan Griffith believes there needs to be clarification on how compound pharmacy regulations are enforced. However, Griffith says the FDA did have the authority to act in this situation.
I want to make sure that we create the right framework to make sure that this doesn't happen again. There were all kinds of warning bells and whistles going off. We could have saved lives.
We reached out to the FDA about the issue. A spokesperson emailed us this statement saying, quote, the NECC is still part of an ongoing investigation and we are not in position to address specifics about our role with the firm. The statement continued to say, quote, FDA has been taking a critical look at our surveillance and enforcement approach to compounding pharmacies to find ways to use our existing authorities more effectively to protect consumers. The agency also says the laws in place are not clear on how to regulate compound pharmacies.